So we are going live. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see a lot of people joining us. We also live on Facebook, Code Academy page. And we are starting. So before starting, a few technical details. There are Q&A button down below for all the participants who are attending this webinar. So you can type your questions in this, and please just refer to a person who would like to give a question to. So after the whole keynote speech and the session, we will have a Q&A session, and you can ask your questions. I will just vocally transmit to all our panelists. So we are starting Digital Explorers meetup number 3, and this time we are online. It's not about coronavirus. I think one of the topics that is going on worldwide. This is about topic how to become a senior IT professional. So we have professionals who are experts in the field. But before that, I would just like to briefly mention what is Digital Explorers. So Digital Explorers is a program which offers a one-year career advancement journey that already took 15 young Nigerians, young ICT talents to Lithuania for paid employment in leading local companies and skills enhancement in emerging technologies. In a nutshell, it gives you a chance to receive many years worth of experience in a single journey and accelerate these talents' career at full speed. So I think John will tell you more about this. But before that, I just want to briefly introduce you to our speakers. So the keynote speaker will be delivered by Peter Milne. He's a technology architect at Adform Copenhagen. And at our panelists. So panelists are Bart from TeleSoftas. Bart is a software engineer from Netherlands, recently came to Lithuania. John works in TeleSoftas as well. He's a software engineer from Nigeria and our fellow digital explorer. Algirdas is from Revolut. He's a lead tech recruiter for one of the most successful, I think, startups in the world. And Artūras Šlajus, he is a software engineer, team lead, and entrepreneur for with a long time experience in this area. And to kick off our meetup today, so I will give, in a few minutes, I will give the floor to digital stage to Peter. But before that, I would like to introduce Peter. So Peter is a technology architect at Adform, based in Copenhagen, where he actively involved in architecting, migrating technologies for practices to scalable enterprise platform. Before Adform, he was a director of application engineering at Aerospike, database start in Silicon Valley, conducted businesses and evangelized Aerospike in 21 countries, ran consulting and education division of Fortis Software, and many more areas. I think Peter will talk about this more. Peter is an accomplished public speaker as well, and we are very glad that he joined us today. Has spoken at Code Europe, Warsaw GS, Build Stuff Vilnius, Mallorca, Vilnius and Mallorca, on San Francisco, New York, São Paulo, London, High Load Strategy Vilnius, and many more meetups. Also, Peter received a Master of Science in Computing from University of Technology in Sydney, has a number of postgraduate academic and commercial qualifications, including an international commercial pilot's license for helicopters. So that's an interesting. And he has flown commercially and for recreation in 12 countries. Peter is a part-time mad scientist, robotics enthusiast, hardware hacker, and 3D printing geek. Peter, so the stage is yours.
Hello, everybody. I apologize for the introduction. That was way too long and far too generous. So let me start with a little bit about myself. Okay, who am I? I'm the old guy. I've been in the industry for about 40 years. So I started in 1980. So you can imagine what I've seen changed. In the early 80s, I was a junior programmer and I worked on the first commercial email systems in the days when you paid a lot of money to have an email address. You paid about $1,000 to have an email address. And so it was a very expensive operation. If you had 1,000 people in your company, your email system cost $1 million in 1980. So I've traveled a lot, I've done a lot, I've been many places, I've had several titles. I've been a CEO and a CTO and a tourist helicopter pilot, a software engineer, a hardware engineer, a climbing and rappelling instructor, just lots and lots of things. But titles are not important. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a recap. In the past, certainly before I started in the industry and after the first decade or so, the projects we had were quite simple. The problem was well understood. It required a few developers, a few analysts. The product had only a few features. Everything was simple. It had a simple programming language. The COBOL that you see on the screen in the green, almost completely correct COBOL you see there, was about the second programming language that I learned. And the algorithm you see on the right-hand side of the screen, the Towers of Hanoi, I'm sure all of us have programmed for or have seen demonstrations of. I remember this was an assignment in my first year in my undergraduate bachelor's degree when we learned about recursion. And I wrote the solution in Pascal. So things were simple. They were interesting, but simple. Today, our projects are massive. They're huge. There are new business domains that haven't been invented before. So let's imagine for a moment something like Facebook. Facebook makes a lot of money from advertising, connects a lot of people together for free and uses their data to advertise to them. That business domain didn't exist maybe 18 years ago. So you can imagine how business domains change. It requires thousands of developers to produce the solution, hundreds of business analysts. It has lots and lots and lots and lots of features, usually written in multiple programming languages. If you're a guy or a girl who says, I'm just going to program in C# and that's going to be my career, that is the same as saying, I'm just going to program in COBOL my whole career. You have to be skilled in multiple languages. Usually the solution has thousands of machines. My current company has 1,600 servers worldwide, 1,600 big, huge, muscly, powerful servers worldwide. The way we store data is a polyglot. So we have some relational data and some raw data and some document style data and some row data and some column data. And the schemas we have to deal with today are multidimensional. So life evolves over a long period of time. So let's talk about a senior IT professional. So what is a senior IT professional? First of all, titles mean nothing. Whether you're a senior developer, a senior software engineer, a senior engineer, a staff engineer, a junior engineer, a software developer class 3, they don't mean anything. It's about what you are as a person. So a senior IT professional wears a lot of hats. You need to be technically competent. You need to understand business. You need to be outcome oriented. You need to be a good communicator. And the last thing is you need to be you. And I'll talk about you towards the end of my talk. So let's talk about technical competency. What does that really mean? So as a senior IT professional, regardless of what your domain of expertise is you have to understand software. You have to understand hardware because the software runs on hardware. It's not magic. It is done in some place. You have to understand operations, or the modern term is DevOps. who takes the piece of software that the software engineer has written, puts it on some server, some piece of hardware somewhere in the magic cloud, and makes it go and make sure it's up. So you need to understand DevOps. You need to understand continuous integration and continuous delivery, the pipeline which takes the software that's come out of an engineer's brain and automatically delivers it towards a place where it can run in production. And you have to understand quality assurance, that big red test button. We test things so that we discover what's wrong with them in advance of them finding their way into the field. So in the old days when they built aircraft, people would put things together and then try and fly it to see if it crashed. Today, we model and test continuously so that we don't have hundreds of souls dying in an aircraft accident. Many of you are probably software engineers. You've got a polytechnic qualification or an undergraduate degree in software engineering or just in programming. And many people are negative about software engineers. But I'm a software engineer, and I'm still a software engineer at the age of 62. I still write code. Let me describe a software engineer. Their job in the world is to create something from nothing. They have an opinion, and they think it's right. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but they think it's right. They have favorite technologies, and the favorite technologies actually change over time. They're super passionate. They love to argue. The joke is that arguing with an engineer is like wrestling with a pig. Eventually, you realize that the pig enjoys it. Now, having said all of that, software engineers are more creative than musicians or artists or writers or movie makers. If you're a software engineer, I'm going to describe what your life is like. You sit in the morning looking at the screens you have on your desk, and you imagine in your mind how the program code is going to execute, what data it's going to use and manipulate, and what the results are going to be under an incredible set of changing and variable circumstances. During that time, you are staring blankly at your screen or off into the distance. You're a little hungry, but you don't want to get up and leave. You may need to go to the bathroom, but you're going to hold on until you find the solution to the problem. That might take 3 hours. While you're doing that, you might write a little code here and there. And if somebody interrupts you, you've lost your train of thought. All of those variables in your mind evaporate, and you look at them and you're a little bit grumpy. So if you're that kind of software engineer, you are in good company, because we create something from nothing. Let's talk about DevOps engineers or operations engineers or operations staff. They're like Scotty on the Enterprise in Star Trek. Captain Kirk wants warp factor 4. Scotty says it's not possible, and yet Scotty does it. So let me give you an example of that. My friend Matas in Lithuania, in Vilnius, Lithuania, I said to him that I wanted to build a solution that required that we would scale in Kubernetes, and would it be possible to put that into our private cloud? And he said, "Oh, we're not going to do that for 5 months. We're not ready for that. We're not aligned. We can't possibly do that." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, we might experiment with it with a few of our own stuff." And over the weekend, he put something together. And it wasn't some experimental thing. He had thought through the problem and seen through it and delivered. So never discount the value of your DevOps engineers. There's also the supporting role. So people in support. If you've ever worked in support, and I've worked in support, you have to deal with grumpy customers or people with problems. You're the glue that glues the technology to the customer. You have to have a level of charisma. You have to be patient and empathetic. You have to do lots of things at once and be super responsive. It's an easy job to be burnt out with. So it's something you may do for a period of your career and then move on to something else. Let me talk about the superhero. We have all been, or currently are, or may be in the future, the superhero who knows everything about the product or the system that we have in production. So the risk in that is that the superhero might go on vacation, could go and have a baby, could leave the company, could get hit by a bus. So one of the things you have to do as a senior IT professional, if you are the superhero, you have to train someone else to be the superhero as well. Okay, so that's the technical thing. I didn't give you a list of courses to study. I've just told you about the things you need to know. Let's talk about business. Okay, what are the products? Why are they useful? Who uses them? How are they marketed? How are they sold? How are they supported? And what ethics are they? So if you work in a company and you want to become a senior IT person, what does the company sell? Does it sell software as a service? Does it sell software products? Does it sell shoes that uses the software you use for distribution? What are the products? Why are they used, and who uses them often goes together. So you have to understand the mind of the consumer of the product. It's important to understand how the products that you make are marketed. What do people say about them? Is it bullshit or is it true? Now, I have to say, a lot of marketing is a little bit bullshit. You have to just get used to that fact. How are they sold? How do salespeople actually convince someone to part with money to use the products that your company produce? Who supports them? Is it an AI system, an AI chatbot that does it? Is it a room full of people who take calls or answer chat messages? And what are the ethics of the business? Is the business honest? Is the product valuable? So it's to help you understand ethics. You can pretty much say that somebody selling crack cocaine is unethical. They're selling you a product that's going to kill you, and it's bad for you and it's bad for the community. But let me ask you the next question. What about insurance? What are the ethics of working for an insurance company? Think about that for a moment. Okay, learn about money, learn about economics. What is revenue? What is cash flow? In fact, cash flow is the most important thing. Learn about tax, and if you're having trouble going to sleep at night, learn about accounting. More importantly, who pays you and why are you paid? So let me give you some examples. If you work for a public organization, like a government or a city, something like that, you get paid out of the taxation revenue that is picked up by the country or the city. And you get paid to build a product that benefits the community. So if you worked, say, for the Nigerian government or the Lithuanian government, you might work for let's say, the health department. And the health department right now is very important. You might need to build a system in a hurry that helps doctors and nurses deal with a health crisis. And that's why you are paid, and the product you build benefits the community. If you work for a commercial organization, you get paid out of the revenue earned by the organization. And you get paid to build a product that is going to improve or increase the revenue for that organization. So that's the commercial side of it. So if there's no taxation or there's no revenue, you don't get paid. Understand how money works, and particularly how cash flow works. Selling. As technical people, we hate salespeople. We think that they are the spawn of Satan and that they all are liars and cheats. And this is not true. Salespeople are practical psychologists. They're people experts. They're very smooth and very charming and very personable. They earn the money. They bring the money in. They have to deal with absolute assholes and pretend to be nice to them. Most of them are motivated to close good ethical deals, and they love to get what they want. So salespeople are good people. If you get past the bravado and the alpha male, alpha female behavior, they're really nice people. Understand selling. You may be involved in some level of technical selling. Okay, you need to become outcome oriented. And I mean outcome oriented, not output oriented. You need to have a process. A process is tools and techniques. So we talk about being agile or being waterfall or being hybrid or being, I don't know, Git flow, whatever you want to call them. In my career, I've seen many, many processes come and go with exotic names and fan clubs and cult followings. That process is designed to help you systematically come to a forecastable future. So learn about these processes and apply them where they need to be applied. You may think you are perfectly agile because you follow all of the ceremonies, but do none of the design or planning based upon agile principles. You may think you're terribly waterfall because you define, develop, and produce and put into production, but find that you're actually a little bit agile along the way. Have a process. The next thing is roadmaps. Often in the modern software space or hardware space, we talk about what's the roadmap for the product. So in simple terms, a roadmap is a plan or plans for delivery. It's not a real plan. It's not an actual time of things. It's what you think you're going to be able to do in 6 months' time or in 9 months' time. A roadmap contains dreams for the future, and dreams are quite important. If you're a technical person, you have woken up in the middle of the night and gone, oh, I now have an answer to that problem. If we just coupled this and that and the first thing together, we would have a marvelous solution. That's one of your dreams that you need to connect and put together in a way that somebody else understands it. Milestones. Milestones are essentially markers that allow, that signify that you've had an outcome that's been delivered. So the word milestone comes from a linear measurement. In the British world, you used to have a long road, and every mile there was a stone on the ground that told you how many miles you were from a certain place. In the US, these are called mile marks. So that's where the word milestone comes. It's a measurement of your journey. Nobody invented kilometer stones, which makes a great deal more sense. Okay, write stuff down. Writing stuff down is very important. As software engineers, we love to write code because everybody understands code and it doesn't lie. As hardware engineers, we love to solder chips together and put them on a breadboard and connect the wires together and watch the lights flash and see the signal on the oscilloscope. But write stuff down. Write down your decisions, your project plans or task lists. Have some way of capturing defects so they don't get lost. Write down something about the release. We used to call them release notes. And write documentation. Writing things down is cathartic. It's good for your soul and helps you clear your mind. So you need to become a writer of sorts. Avoid the cargo cult. If you're not sure what this is, I'll put a link in the presentation. But during the Second World War in the Pacific Islands, the Allied forces would come and they would trade with the natives, these wonderful, sweet Polynesian people. They would trade with them for food, and they would give them useful things like machetes and wire and rope and stuff like that. And all of these products came out of the bellies of cargo planes that landed. While these wonderful, well-meaning and beautiful people looked at the cargo planes, they didn't understand the connection between the goods being shipped from somewhere else and arriving. So they built, when the Second World War ended, they built facsimiles of the things that used to deliver their goods. And they hoped that by building these facsimiles, somehow the goods would materialize. So it's an interesting discussion, and it's in no way degrading towards these people. They were primitive people who had never been exposed to more sophisticated environments, and they were delightful humans. I actually have many family relatives who are Polynesian. So the same thing applies to the way we write software. We might write some really cool software, but it's got to get into production. It's got to get tested. It's got to be documented, and it's got to be sold. Any disconnect from that means that the product is wasted. Okay, you've all heard of Murphy's Law. Let me translate that to the simplest form. Shit happens. In scientific terms, this is called entropy. It's the third law of thermodynamics. And if you have a teenage boy in your home, or you were a teenage boy, you may look into that bedroom and discover that a clean room becomes messy all by itself. So in simple terms, as an IT professional, you have to deal with the unexpected. You can't plan for everything. You just have to build a set of capabilities and tools as to what to do. In the old days, we used to face things like the computer room flooding. What do you do about that? Do you get buckets and bucket the water out? Do you drill a hole in the floor for the water to run out? What do? You have to deal with the unexpected. Okay, and we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes in our design, our coding, in our hardware, in our project, in our marketing, and the way we sell things. So what you need to do is do a retrospective and work out what went wrong, how it could be better, and change it. The poorest of IT professionals are the ones who kill the messengers, the ones who kill the whistleblowers. That area, if you have someone in your organization who does that, perhaps they should go into politics. The next thing you need to be is a good communicator. And this is quite important. So one way to do this is to learn how to be a public speaker. It is terrifying. It is soul destroying. It is hard. But if you learn how to be a public speaker, you can become a good communicator. Once you've learned how to do it, speak at a conference. It's good for your soul. It's cathartic. You need to be concise in your words when you speak. So simplify things. You need to adjust your pace and your tempo to meet the organization. And you need to be sensitive to culture and language. For example, my native language is English. I speak the Australian dialect of English, but when I speak to you, I speak a little slower and a little clearer so that you can get every word. If I spoke in my Australian speed, which is like this, "G'day, how are you? You want to come over to my place this afternoon for a barbie?" There are things that you would miss. The other thing too is you need to be simple. The famous physicist Richard Feynman said, if you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it. So your goal is to be able to explain something in simple terms. So you might need to understand it more. Be a listener, not just a hearer. Listen to people. Listen to the dialogue in movies or TV. Listen to the lyrics in music. and be the last to speak in a meeting. If you're the last to speak, you can hear what everybody has to say. You can distill what you hear into semantics and motive. So what were the things that were said and why they were said? If somebody comes in with an agitated look on their face and they're grumpy and says, this is the worst thing that we've ever had, the plan might be bad, but why did they say it was the worst and why were they angry? Perhaps there is some other motive there that you can help with, like they've had a bad day, their cat just died, that kind of thing. The other thing you need to do is learn how to write and learn how to diagram. I think when I did my master's degree, the thing I learned the most was learn how to write so other people would understand what I've written. So document things, guides and articles. I write Medium articles occasionally, and it's the most painful thing in the world because I write the same way I speak. And then I realize that I have to write in a better, simplified way. So write so your mother can understand it. Your mother may not understand the technical terms, but she should be able to read what you've written and understand what you're talking about. And learn to diagram. You see at the bottom of the screen a UML component diagram that describes an architecture that I worked on for Adform in a simplest form. The colors have meaning. The shapes have meaning. The lines have meaning. They all have semantics. You should be able to draw a diagram that somebody else can look at and kind of get it before you explain it to them. If you have to explain every detail to them, then you have failed in building the diagram. Read. I can't emphasize this too much. Read continuously. Read books, read articles, read news, and particularly read your colleagues' emails or their messages on Slack or Teams or something like that. There's a reason they wrote that. It's sometimes hard to write it down. They've sent you a message for a purpose. And then comprehend what you read. So remember when you were at school, you did a subject called comprehension. You had to read a passage and then your teacher would ask you about what you read. So it has to go into your brain and be stored in your short-term and long-term memory and connected together with the neurons in your brain. So comprehend what you read. Okay, I promise you I'm nearly finished. Now let me talk about you. Okay, many of you are in your 20s. You've started your career. This is the decade of decision. This is when you decide what your personality is going to be, what your core belief system is, what your politics are, what your health behavior is, things, the way you eat, the way you exercise, what you're going to do. Your attitude towards things, what your ethics are and what your intellect is going to be. These are careful decisions that you should make. We are all influenced by the political system we live in, by the cultural traditions of the system we live in. In the IT industry, we are lucky enough to have an influence where we can reach out to anyone all over the world, regardless of the color of their skin or the shape of their eyes or the language they speak or their religion or their lack of religion. And we have something in common. So this decade, make careful decisions about your personality, your attitudes, your politics, your ethics, and all things that form you as a person. Be bold without arrogance. So take the initiative, step up, take action, and above all, talk to people. But don't be arrogant. People matter. You may not agree with them, and you may not like to be with them, but they still matter. When you take the initiative, it might fail. So you see Jon Snow there, galloping off to save his brother. He was not successful. In fact, This was the beginning of the Battle of the Bastards, and he almost lost his life. So your initiative might not be successful, but you can learn from it. Don't be complacent. It's easy to sit around and find fault. It's easy to go, well, I'll just watch it fail and I'll be able to go, yeah, I told you so. Think of things, dream of things, and participate, and then talk to people. You can't be a senior IT professional without talking to people. Have some ethics in what you do and some compassion in the way you deal with people. I once had to fire from my company, I had to fire my best friend. He was performing very poorly, and he was my friend. Now, I had to fire him because my business partner was grumpy at me, so I fired him, but I also found him a new job. The work we were asking him to do was outside his skill set, not his technical skill set, but his intellectual and emotional skill set to get the job done. So I found him a job where his technical skill set would allow him to continue. So have ethics and be compassionate. And above all, talk to people. You've got to be able to talk. Okay, my last slide. Be ever learning. Don't expect things to be constant. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see an old telephone. That's the kind of telephone that I would have seen in my house as a child. And on the right-hand, next to that, you see the marvelous supercomputer that we all carry in our pocket that will tell us any fact, anytime we need it, and allow us to look at things and see things instantaneously. We have a lot of information. They aren't the same thing. They've evolved over time. You need to as well. You need to accept the change and adapt and retrain. I have programmed in 19 programming languages and 12 operating systems and 7 computer architectures. I'm not an expert in any of them anymore, but they all help me form the person that I am. Over time, your beauty will fade. Your young, natural, gorgeous handsomeness will pass, and then you'll become old like me. And hopefully your intelligence will shine on. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Peter, so much. We have few questions from the audience. I will just transmit them vocally. So one of them, how do I determine the next most important thing to learn to move forward, towards being a senior? There is so much that I don't know, and new things are always getting piled on top of that.
Okay, so there are so many things that you don't know. When you studied at university, I'm pretty sure you didn't know anything, but you thought you knew a lot. And then after the first few weeks, you realized that you didn't know much. Well, that's exactly like the rest of us. So take one thing. Take one thing that you don't know and give yourself time every day or every week to study that one thing. For example, I wanted to learn to dance Lindy Hop. No laughing, please. And I did. So I took 1 hour a week out of all of my geek stuff to learn to dance Lindy Hop. It was painful. I was clumsy. I was terrible. It was embarrassing. But eventually, after about 8 weeks, I was less than an idiot. I was just a bit more talented than I was before. So take one thing and learn, say, about accounting, learn a little bit about cash flow. Put it aside, keep it in the back of your memory, and remember that you know you learnt it. Then take the next thing. We have busy, complex jobs where we're always dealing with complex things. Take a little time to learn your own thing.
Okay, thanks. And the other question was how not to, like in quotes, watch something fail when decision makers fail to listen.
Okay, so I know the problem. So a decision maker has to make a choice. They have to make a choice usually between, sometimes between two good things, or sometimes between two bad things, and you have to make the choice between which is the least bad, and they get it wrong. So getting grumpy about it won't help. But one way you can do this is say, okay, I understand your decision, but I want to make it clear to you that these 6 points may cause you to have a problem in the future. And smile at them, look at them very lovingly and say, and this is an I told you so moment. And then leave it at that. And they will remember the fact. And at partway through, you might say, look, Bob, are you sure we're not going towards that I told you so moment? And he will go, oh, maybe we need to adjust our course. Or he might go, no, we're going down that path. You can't do anything more than that. And it's very frustrating. But so give everybody the information that they need and help them understand why the information is important and let them make a choice. They have to understand for themselves. It's not important just because you said it or told them. They have to understand why. And that's my best advice. And to be honest, I've seen lots of things fail and gone, oh shit, really? Do we have to be in this situation? But that's life.
That's true. That's very true. So in this case, if we will be like in the audience, we will just make a huge applause for you. So thank you very much, Peter, for sharing your insights, your stories, your thoughts. And we're jumping to our panel discussion. And first, I would like to ask Bart. You're a software engineer from Netherlands. You came to Lithuania. So what is the journey, not just from Netherlands going to Lithuania, what's your journey as a senior developer? Could you share your experience, the challenges, the struggles, the expectations, the fails even, and the lessons you have learned?
Yeah, so I moved 3 years ago to Lithuania, coming from Netherlands. Before that, I studied in Denmark, worked there also as a software engineer. So my international adventure started before Lithuania in that way. So what are my key takeaways from that? First of all, there are many cultural differences between the countries, and you have to be aware of that. And they can be a strength, actually, because you're coming from a different point of view. And in my opinion, as a senior, that's also important that you don't focus too much in the current view or the current frame that the problem or a solution is presented, but that you also can think out of the box. And one of those things specifically to Lithuania, for example, what I experienced is I come from the Netherlands, where we are perceived as rude, but we are not rude, we are straightforward, we're direct to the point. And that isn't always as accepted here in Lithuania or in other parts of the world. So that was one of my personal experience why I have to adapt. And that is one, in my opinion, also a skill as a senior, or when you're becoming a senior, you need to learn how to adapt. As Peter already mentioned earlier, the world around you will change in your career significantly. So that is one key way, coming from a different country and working in different countries, that I would definitely say to improve as a person is your adaptability.
Okay, thanks a lot. John, I have a question for you. From your side, what it takes to be a senior developer? What similarities and differences you see between Lithuania and Nigeria? So your experience in this.
Okay, so there are lots of similarities and most of them have been mentioned. However, there are a few differences in the sense that in Lithuania, for example, you can be considered a senior from just a particular field. Like let's say the stack you only write is Java and you have some understanding of hardware and all that. But in Nigeria, it's difficult for you to scale to become a senior professional without having understanding of more than one stack, because you are given diverse kinds of problems every day requiring diverse kinds of stacks. And most importantly, several times the companies are kind of budgets, they're kind of in a budget in the sense that they don't want to recruit somebody else to do the job. So most times you always have the challenge or the task of learning on the job. But the problem that brings is that you may not have several years to become very deep and sound in a particular field if you are not putting conscious effort in that field. So sometimes you can have in Nigeria, you can have a senior person and he has, let's say, 3 years experience with Node.js. He has another year's experience with Java, another years of experience with these. And it's going to be a little bit different from someone that has, let's say, 8 years experience writing Java and some hardware. So that's one of the major differences that I've seen between Lithuania, example, and Nigeria. But the other thing that I see is that here, people generally here are kind of reserved. They don't really tell you what's on their mind. So it's kind of difficult. You have to be sensitive emotionally to be able to understand that what he's saying is not what he actually means. So, but in Nigeria, people are going to tell you the way things are. So even if you're not going to be cool with it, they're just going to tell you the way things are because it's better like that. So it's kind of, it was a little bit difficult at the beginning when I got here because you have to understand that when someone is smiling at you in Lithuania, it does not mean he's happy with you.
So I think you are agree with Bart that well, straightforwardness versus this like politeness in the paper. Algirdas, jumping to you, and you are Lithuanian in this case. So we had many discussions with you about what labor market is, IT sector-wise, what it takes to be professional IT developers, what's the developers' part in the market. Could you give us your insights and thoughts from your experience? What is the situation today? How people understand this position as a senior, because you are recruiting ones, so the mismatch between understanding of the person and your expectations as a company as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I can start from like sharing a couple of examples from like I think currently like the market is split into companies that are led by like and completely driven by result, and some companies that are like less driven by result, more driven by processes, for example, or like working on less challenging projects. And I see what I see basically when I compare those two is that in the first companies, it all matters to skills. I mean, like you get your seniority just because your knowledge, skills, and abilities. In second companies, you can get your like seniority just because of your tenure, just because of your years of experience that you have in general. And this is like a big, how to say, like gap, especially when you come to, for example, public sector or like companies that work with public sector. I mean. And this is like one of the most important things is like when it comes to the market itself, like currently like Lithuanian companies are also focusing much, like, I mean, shifting into the mindset that, yeah, like we give you a seniority just because of knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have. I mean, like for a junior role, you have to know these things. For a middle level role, you have to know these things. For senior level role, you have to know these things. And this is pretty much like how it's getting evaluated. It's pretty much like the model that you can see in the rest of the world, but it's, I mean, like it's getting a bit more and more adopted, because previously it was more like, okay, someone is not happy in the company, let's give a senior role and make the person stay, or like something like that. Now it's like being shifted to another direction.
Okay, that's an interesting. how do you manage these expectations during the interviews? Because, well, I'm coming into the interview, I'm saying I'm a senior, I'm applying for senior position, and then you see, oh no, sorry guy, you are just maybe a medium mid-level developer, so to say.
Yeah. So for example, in my opinion, all recruiters have to be technical. I mean, if a recruiter is recruiting technical roles and he or she doesn't understand like technical terms and like how to assess the level, the person shouldn't be recruiting tech. That's my opinion. And this is pretty much like how to save the time of the engineers, how to save the time of the company, because, you know, like how many people we push through, we just save the time of our engineers later. So recruiters should understand, you know, like, for example, okay, for just if you want to be a senior, you have to be super well knowledge in like CI and CD processes, good in TDD, let's say, good in concurrency and multi-threading, handling that, good in databases, good in, I don't know, like Java, PHP, whatever, generics, and so on and so forth. For example, then we can say, okay, you don't know two of that, that's cool, but we can go only for the middle level role, because if you want to become a senior, those are the areas where you are currently not that good. You like, for example, databases. You are not exactly sure, you know, like how database transactions happen. Like what are the utilization levels? Or for example, you are struggling with Java. You don't know well what are the newest features of Java and so on that we use, and we cannot give you a senior role. That's what pretty much. I mean, it's like it should be a clear collaboration between the recruiter and the engineer, because like miscommunication every time it results in like rejected offers, unsatisfied people when they join the company, and it's bad for both sides. So in my opinion, recruiters should know their thing. Yeah, that's what the successful recruiters do, and engineers always leave happy after the conversations that are technical. I think so. I haven't met any single one who said that was a bad decision.
Okay, thanks. Artūrai, we're talking about senior professional, so you are more not just a software engineer, you are entrepreneur as well. So what's your personal story behind this, that you are experienced software engineer and you went to the entrepreneurial side? So Peter mentioned in his speech as well that this is important to know business. And the second question, what features you are looking for in a person when you're hiring also a senior professional, when you're searching for the team to build?
Okay, so I've been programming for 18 years now, and I started for a very dumb reason. There was a game called Warcraft 3, and we had a clan out of 2 people, and that clan didn't have a website. And you know, you can't have a clan out of whole 2 people without a pretty cool website. And there wasn't things like, you know, Wix or Squarespace back in the day, so I had to learn how to program and build a website. So I always was a person who's driven by a goal, like I want to do X, and then I go and learn how to do X. And I've learned most of my programming skills in that way. These days, I also think that that's the absolute worst way how to learn to program there is. When I'm looking for people, when I've looked for people in our businesses, what I actually look for is not really current knowledge, because current knowledge is, as Peter said, you know, you may have some obsolete knowledge, maybe some technologies aren't applicable in this use case that we are hiring for, etc. But what I always look for is curiousness and ability to change and ability to learn. And that's the most important factor, because I've met with senior, in quotes, people who've been doing Java for 10 years, and then you ask them, okay, so look at this. Like this solution would be 10 times shorter if you just used, like declarative programming or functional programming or something else that you don't have experience with. And he says like, no, I did this for 10 years. It worked for me. Why should I change?
I stick to it.
Yeah, and that unfortunately doesn't work. For example, me personally, I started with dynamic languages, and it's very funny because if you talk to me like 10 years ago, I would swear by them and I would say like Ruby is very great and Python is excellent as well. And now I run away from them and I say, having a good type system is a very, very helpful tool in writing code that's robust, that's refactory, that's easily refactorable, and basically, you can express things in type system and let the compiler do the work instead of you, doing the work there. And what did it take for me to, change my opinion was basically, trying and then seeing and failing and having a bunch of Ruby code that had a bunch of methods where the first line would be like a type check. Does the right things come here, please? and if you're a stubborn person, if you're not a curious person, you would say, that's fine. That's not a problem. And I constantly meet such people. So everything can be learned. And the question is whether you want to learn it or not.
Okay. I think I have a question from the audience for Algirdas, Artūras, and maybe Peter. How do you measure ability to learn during the interview?
I can answer that. So actually, we don't do the interviews in that standard sense where a person comes and you put him to a whiteboard and say implement a binary tree from scratch or something like that. I think it's very pointless. First of all, it doesn't represent what will you be doing day to day most of the time. And the other thing is, you can't decide whether a person is curious. So what we usually do is a person comes in and you talk to him. Why did you start to program? What's your drive behind it, etc. Just to make sure he's not one of those people who like read an article in a news site that said that programmers get a lot of money and now he's applying for a job. And then you say, okay, so you don't know Scala and don't know functional programming, which most people don't. And you say, excellent, look, here's a bunch of resources, here's a task, go and do it. Like learn it and do it and send us the result. And don't be afraid, like we're gonna give you feedback and you're gonna improve on it, and we're gonna get you some more feedback and you're gonna improve on that. And we see how that goes. And it either goes very nice, like a person reads what we've given to him, applies it, maybe it does some slight errors, we give the feedback, they fix it, and it's all good. Or they do it in their own way, ignores all of your resources, and then you give them the feedback and they ignore that as well, and then you know that, well, it's just not the right fit.
Okay.
Yeah, I can follow on that as well. So I mean, like when it comes to ability to learn, I think it's more not about like ability to learn, but eagerness to learn. Because like I think all of us, we are sort of able to learn, but the person, when we are speaking about the person that we want to hire, the person should be eager to learn. If the person is not eager to learn and is not willing to learn, nothing helps in such way. So when it comes to software engineers that I was hiring for, like for most of my career, most of the time we were looking for people, you know, like who are able to think broadly. I mean, like have a critical thinking. Similarly to what Artūras said before, is like if someone used a particular language or developed in a particular way for 10 years, but cannot answer the question why I was using this technology, why I'm using like Spring at this moment. Is it just because like the whole world use it, or just because I really need that? Because like ability to question yourself also leads to curiosity. I mean, like broad openness, open-minded ability to, you know, like never settle on your current, how to say, skill set. This is what most companies look like. And you can test that by also giving some skills. Okay, for example, you can have an engineer who is developing in .NET, which syntax is sort of similar to Java, but the person has done some Java projects in his pet projects. I mean, like after work, and the person is really eager to switch. So that's fine, you know, like you could you can test the eagerness to learn and say like, okay, I see that you are really, really into that. Let's look at the following, you know, like let's give you a task, which is sort of similar to our domain, and let's give you 1 week. And let's see how everything happens, you know, like, and then, you know, like we will be able to see how person does code, how person thinks of some particular problems. Is person eager to, you know, like try out some frameworks that he or she didn't use, or work without, or frameworks that he or she was being stuck before. So that's I think also important thing. So in my opinion, like curiosity is always a key point, but it's not always about software engineers. I think it's applicable to any specialists that are out there.
So I have something to add to that. I like the take-home technical exam. Remember those horrible things at university where they gave you the take-home exam, and you died for 8 days trying to answer the question? Well, take-home homework is great for technical assessment. Particularly, I was hiring some people a few years ago who were Node.js talented people, but I wanted specifically for them to work with GraphQL. So I gave them a GraphQL assignment. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of examples. And it was how they learned to solve the problem based upon the documentation and the examples that were available, which were useful. I knew they didn't know about GraphQL. It was the learning process. The second thing is, so take-home homework is great. The second thing is, when you speak to them in the actual interview, at that point, you've already assessed their technical skill. You want to know what sort of a human they are. And this is the hardest part. So I asked 2 questions. I asked them what was their greatest success, whether it was something in production or in their own life or something like that. And everybody knows what that is. But I asked them what their greatest screw up was and how they fixed it. And the greatest screw up shows that they're human, that they're humble enough to report the fact that they screwed up, and that they're creative enough to find a solution. My greatest screw up was I deleted half the source modules for the premier product of the company I was working on. Now, in today, that doesn't matter because we've got Git or something like that that can fix us. In those days, we didn't. We just copied files. So I deleted half of the source files. I thought my career was over and I was going to die and that the world was going to come in and that great monsters were going to attack me on the way home in the car, all sorts of things. And so it cost a day's production and they restored from a backup. But it was a disaster. It was half the files because I thought I was a legend and I thought I was a hero and I did something in arrogance and stupidity. So asking somebody what their worst failure was from a technical perspective and how they recovered from it is a way to determine what kind of human they are.
Okay, thanks. That's a good one. The biggest screw-ups shows the person you are actually and how you deal with the situation. I'm jumping to the other question because we have many, and maybe to Bart and John, this is the question. What's the difference between someone that travels around different companies to become a senior and someone that works for a very long time in one company? So like basically 10 years in one company, or just going through different projects because to want like a broad experience? So what's your intake on this? What do you think?
John, you want to start, or I can take it?
Okay.
So go ahead, John. Sorry.
Okay, so now that question is a little bit dicey because it depends on, if you're working in the same company for years, it also depends on the kind of project you're working on. Because sometimes you can work in different companies and you don't work on projects that are going to challenge you to become a better version of yourself. And you can work in the same company and work on a particular project or different projects even in the same company, and you get challenged over the years. So however, I think what is much more important, it's not just working in different companies for different years, but it's actually about the project. Because as an engineer, when you work on a project, you know if you're actually being challenged and if you're getting better in what you're doing. Because it doesn't matter if you move from a company, move across 3 different companies in 3 years. And also, technically, it's also not really good if you are very volatile in how you work, in the sense that you just work 6 months in a company, you move to another company. That means that no company can rely on you. You're not reliable because you can take up the context of a project that we're able to give you in 6 months. And the time we need you to start giving back to us, maybe start training junior developers or mid-levels, you know where to be found. So moving around companies in little time shows how volatile you are, how unreliable you are. However, your depth or what you learn is not a matter of the number of companies you move to, it's a matter of the kind of project you work on. So,
John, a related question to this. What are the key things that you learned in Lithuania that you would like to bring back to Nigeria? So this is a question from the audience.
Okay, so one of the key things that I learned that I will try to bring back here is the fact that people are actually very objective when it comes to criticism. And the sense that when I want to criticize your work, there's nothing personal about it. And for example, if you're doing a code review, it does not make sense if you review a code and tell them this is wrong without preferring a solution. Because if you're going to tell me this is the problem, you have to tell me why it's the problem and how I can fix it. That is actually what is called constructive criticism. So I think that's a very, very important thing that I saw, and it's quite it's something that I would like to take back to Nigeria, because sometimes people in Nigeria criticize when they have personal attachment towards some things, and some people don't even accept criticism very well. So when you criticize someone's work, also make sure that you celebrate them for what they've done well. An example, if I have a code base and I'm reviewing your code base and I see some things are wrong, I could tell you this is wrong, you could do this. In fact, sometimes you could put it in form of suggestion. However, I would also be smart enough to tell you I like the way you implement some particular features, because we are still humans and you shouldn't trample on anybody's ego.
I want to add to this. Criticizing without explaining, yeah, it's pretty stupid. And the magnificent thing is, even if you're a senior, you can still be pretty dumb. And what happens when you explain, like you say, hey, this is bad in such and such a way, and you should do this because of these and these reasons. And the guy says, but you're missing this point. And you're like, oh, then you're not wrong. Then this isn't dumb. So that's a very important thing to have in mind as a leader, that you're not, a god of coding.
That's a
or
good
any sorts.
Bart, coming back to the question, long time in the company versus many companies, like 10 years, like 15 companies in 10 years or something.
Yeah, so actually what John mentioned, it's very similar to my opinion in that way. switching a lot of companies and working there for a short time usually is an indicator that there is something wrong, either most likely with you, either you can't adapt to the environments or you haven't found what you're looking for. And if you want to switch a lot of companies just to reach seniority, I'm not sure if you understand what seniority exactly means. It doesn't mean that you did a lot of things or you are the best expert at the field. It's more also a personality. In that way, you can adapt. You know, of course, what you're talking about. You need to know the fundamentals. You can work with people. You can guide people. You can teach people, and you understand what the business is, what you're doing. So if you move through a lot of companies, usually you also move throughout domains. And that is where actually your seniority starts to shine. If, for example, you're able to switch those domains easily and then still be productive, help other people, help other teams, and get your goals, it wouldn't be much of a problem. However, there is always a risk in that way that you just get flooded and you don't focus on anything, you don't specialize on anything, and you have worked 20 years in 10 different companies and you ask yourself, what is it that I know? And you found out that you actually don't know much. You are not the person that can easily work with others, because after 6 months, you don't build up a connection and you say bye. So in that way, it's a trade-off. I would more say stick at least for 1 or 2 years at the job, especially if you like it. Build up your network, build up your people, build yourself up in the company. And also one thing I would say is not so much about what you think that you are a senior, it's also a lot what your peers around you think of you. So for example, if there is a problem within your team, and in our teams we don't like to define roles, so we don't really have a title, it's just a bunch of guys working together. But you can for yourself personally see, okay, I'm reaching seniority or I am senior. If there is a problem, nobody kind of knows the answer, but they're coming for you for help. And that is where it's important. So in my opinion, switching a lot of jobs, it doesn't hurt, it can't hurt that much your seniority, but prefer not to do it.
Bart, going to the other question, but this related to what you have said. How do you manage a junior developer who thinks that he or she is a senior or like mid-level and negotiating for this title, but don't think that it's time yet?
That's a very good question, actually. First of all, I think you need to show why. So don't only tell the person why, but with an example, show. And if you are in doubt, of course, make always your goals clear. As a company, we define you need to, I think previously Algirdas said that as well, you need to have these kind of skills, this kind of experience. You need to already be X amount of working, for example. If it's a junior in your own company, you need to have X amount of work experience within the team. And how would you identify or limit that person? I would think, in my opinion, give him a task or her, give him or her a task. And in that way, it may be rude, but show that you are senior. Show that what you are saying actually matches your actions. And that is for everybody actually in the call. If you're a junior and you think you're a mid or you're a senior, show it. Because that is the only way that other people will see it and will acknowledge it. And then you don't even come in these discussions where you think you are a senior, but other people think not.
Okay. Peter, question to you. It's related to also the senior, junior type of area. What's the best way to switch from one area to the other? For example, a senior backend developer wants to switch to system programming, operating systems, drivers, etc. Should this person be willing to accept junior level roles in the area, even if they have gained some proficiency in the system programming with personal projects, but no work experience in the area?
Okay, so let me ask the question another way. If you were going to go on a helicopter flight over a beautiful tropical island, would you like to have a brand new pilot that's had their pilot's license for 2 weeks, or would you like to have a pilot with 15 years experience? Okay, so I've put that into perspective. Let me put it into another perspective. Imagine a helicopter pilot has been able to fly a certain kind of helicopter for a long period of time, but wants to switch to a new kind. Should they expect to do all the big, important, impressive jobs, or learn how this new helicopter works? So I've given you some out of IT examples because it pertains to me. And so, yes, sometimes you have to change your work role if you're going to change your technology or the function of that technology. So exactly, go from a back-end developer to be a Rust developer who's going to build device drivers or something like that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have changed rank or importance or value to the organization. There have been many times where I have not taken a step up. I have taken a step sideways or a step down so that I can learn something new. Mm-hmm. And I only, in most cases, I maybe have taken a salary cut in a few places, but not very often. So it's important to understand that this rank doesn't exist. You're not, this is not the military. You're not promoted from, private to corporal to sergeant to lieutenant, stuff like that. It is not that kind of a rank. It's about what you can do. So you might take a more junior role and the person hiring you looks at you and goes, this is somebody with talent and skill, but just needs to learn the technology. And therefore I'll give them the chance to do that because they will pay off in the future.
Okay. I think that like an open question from the audience, I don't know who can answer, but maybe you will jump. Since there are lots of things to learn to become a senior IT professional, and it always seems like I'm falling behind, not me, somebody, anonymous attendee. Where do I find the free time to do other non-professional things? I don't want my life to be all about software. So balance, work-life balance.
I can start. So right now I work a job for 8 hours a day, 9 if you include lunch, and I exercise, and then there's nothing else because we're all quarantined. So start with that. That's an excellent point of free time. But in general, it just relates to anything. If you're not learning about software, you should be probably learning about people, communication, or finance or accounting, God forbid. And you have to, as a human being, you have to just find the time for that. So, you can always find like half an hour or an hour a day for learning, maybe a bit more in the weekends. And the real question is whether you want to, or whether you would rather like to spend that browsing Facebook. And in case you don't know how much time you spend browsing Facebook, try tracking it. It's scary. So it's all about your own decisions. And there's also a great book called Atomic Habits that basically gives you point-by-point, step-by-step guide on how to find the time.
Okay.
I agree absolutely with that. But I have to say that we have very interesting jobs. We will never, as an individual, know it all. We won't even know 1% of it all. We'll only know a little bit. And I like to say that we're all idiots. We're just slightly better than an idiot in certain areas. So it's important to understand that there's lots to learn. And there's lots to consume. It's better to develop the skill on how to learn than it is to store facts. Facts are a Google away. Facts are a book away. Facts are a question away. But how to use those facts, that information, and turn it into knowledge, and then process that knowledge into wisdom is something that you must learn. And sometimes you have to do something else outside your job to allow you to connect the facts together to knowledge and the knowledge together into wisdom. So find something that is unrelated to your job and learn it. And you will have connections during that learning process that will enable your mind to focus on your daily job. One last little catchphrase from me. We work to live. We don't live to work. So there is a cat or a dog or a snake in your life. There's a wife or a husband or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a dance partner or a fishing partner or someone in your life. Cultivate something outside your work and you will find that the things in your work also improve.
Okay, we are coming, so we have 7 minutes left, many questions. I won't cover all, sorry guys, but some of the questions that, John, what should Lithuanian developers learn from Nigerian developers? So that's the question, came up just recently.
I think one of the things about Nigerian developers is they won't, most times, even if you're supposed to work from 8 to 5, most times they won't stand up if at 5 there's a problem, pending problem, and they have to fix it. Because sometimes it's quite difficult to have a train of thought in programming, and if you stand up from it, before you could connect the dots back to where you were, it's going to take a long time. So sometimes the persistence and the doggedness of Nigerian developers is something that I wish that some developers here have it.
Okay. I think one of the last questions, I think, is this, the measure that, I know that there are tech people in this meetup who are watching, so I understand where the questions come from. Are there specific metrics to measure while considering someone for senior software engineer role? Is it relative to years of experience or number of projects worked or the companies worked for? Or is this the role just a tag place based on your feeling and feeling of those around you? Very open question, just who wants to kick on it?
Yeah. So I can go with that. So basically, seniority really depends on the company, as I have mentioned. But in general, if we take a global approach, seniority is about your availability to solve particular problems. I would say, like, if company assigns person to a seniority level just because years of experience, the question is like, so what's the purpose of that? Because like, the most important thing is like, senior people are different from other people. For example, like if we take junior developers, normally juniors are people who just master the language. Then we have middle level engineers who master the language and they master the domain. And then we have senior engineers who are able to master the language, the domain, and the business requirements, and also put it like into like under leadership role. I mean, like being able to transmit all of those knowledge. So yeah, in general, I would say like it all comes to the companies themselves. I mean, like it really depends. Companies, there are different companies, and of course I know that there are companies that focus on years of experience, and they see engineer coming with 8 years of experience from one company, and they say, okay, you are a senior, and that's it. Other companies challenge people. They say, okay, you come with 8 years of experience, that's great. So now let's see how good you are at those areas. You're developed in Java, that's fine. Okay, what's your experience with newer features of Java 8, for example, stream APIs, functional interfaces, Lambda expressions? How good you are with that? some people have 8 years of experience working in Java, but they don't know those features. So yeah, how can you consider them a senior if you have those features? I mean, like your like in your daily job, use it like very, very often, and so on. So it only goes like specific requirements, but that's how I would put it.
Okay, going final question maybe, and a question for me as well. So just to wrap up, I few things and keywords that I just written down is curiosity and human being. So basically human being has to be curious, because that's why all the innovations come from. Your advice to a developer, tech person, network specialist, UX designer, wherever, who is planning to come to work in Lithuania, what's your advice for all the like labor market, for the changing, for the people who want to build their careers? Key things that they have to like take out next day, do something with their careers. Algirdas, you are the first in my screen.
Okay. I would say be open-minded and be curious. I think those two skills, like those attitudes, skills combined, they bring the greatness. And yeah, I think I shouldn't emphasize that more, because like it comes like natural to every person who is about to achieve greatness in the future. Without being curious, it's very tough to be open-minded. Without being open-minded, it's very tough to deal with other people. So it all comes to people in the end. So yeah, that's my advice in such case.
Okay, Bart?
I would say, adding up to Algirdas, maybe from a bit more technical, as an IT specialist, build a home lab. Doesn't mean you have actual physical hardware. It can be in the cloud. Build your home lab, play with it around, and do projects. It's also a good way for you to learn and focus on things you want to learn new, which you don't always have in your job. So develop yourself. That's the most important thing.
Nice. Artūras?
So the question is, what should you? Sorry, could you repeat the question?
The advice for the developers in their careers, what they have to do in order to become senior ones.
Oh, always keep pushing forward. And what that means, well, it's a very nice slogan. What that really means is, don't be complacent. Don't sit in one place and say, okay, I now know it all. For example, I was searching for a job. I was switching jobs, and I did have a few 3 months. So I thought, let's learn Rust. Why? Because it has an interesting memory management system, and it has an interesting idea of lifetimes. Will I ever write systems or drivers? Unlikely, but it was something that that I wasn't used to, and it was a very intellectually stimulating experience. So just keep doing that. And what I want to also emphasize a lot is, when you go towards senior roles, that's especially important, but even in other roles, like junior roles as well, people kind of think of programmers as these non-social people and people that don't talk to each other, but that's totally wrong. Your ability to talk to other people effectively, to tell them things, to listen what you're being told, is super important. So don't brush off the soft skills like psychology or communication or negotiation, because those really improve basically your day-to-day life. Like, everybody has misunderstandings and disagreements, and having those soft skills means that you're not gonna get home angry, but instead angry and in conflict with your colleagues, but instead will be seen, as somebody who can work towards a solution.
John?
Okay, I think building on what Algirdas has said, I think one of the things you should also do is be open to contributing or looking at open source projects, because interestingly, you would discover or learn new things without having to maybe take a book and start reading it. And another thing is try to contribute to the community in the sense that you should also try to answer questions on Stack Overflow. Most of the time we go to Stack Overflow to pick answers. You don't also look at who answers the question. So there's some interesting questions that you might have seen in your career that when you try to answer a question on Stack Overflow, for example, you discover that you have to think more about the answers you're given, which also makes you learn more while trying to get other people to learn from you. And being open, yes, you can meet people from different culture, different backgrounds. So being able to relate with them is quite important, and it would help you to scale. So that's it.
Thanks. And Peter?
My colleagues in the panel are correct. Let me show you. This is a Raspberry Pi cluster that runs Kubernetes. I built it just recently because I was bored and I'm in quarantine and wanted to do something else. So having a home lab is fun. I have no idea what I would do with that. But it is important to develop your soft skills, to develop your thoughts and feelings about things. In your 20s, of course, you're very passionate about your feelings. Everything is black and white. This is the right way, that's the wrong way. When you get to be old like me and feeble like me and weak like me and forgetful like me, you see things a little bit more broadly. I would say develop your social skills. We are fortunate in the IT industry where you can meet people from all cultures, from all spoken languages, from all parts of the world. And the way we adapt, the way we see the problems, it is my opinion that when I work with somebody who has equal skills to me, but has grown up in a different cultural background to me, when we look at the problem, instead of seeing it straight on, we see more of the problem. We see round the edges of the problem, and therefore we can solve the problem a whole lot quicker. So be open, be curious, be industrious, which means do something with your curiosity. Learn new things, even if the things aren't related to your work, because it changes the way your brain works, and that will come out in your job.
Amazing. I've heard about the theory about IC engineers and learning how to play piano. There are a lot of similarities in this, and kind of makes sense. White, black, zeros, ones. So that's kind of a nice thing. One of our panelists, attendees, said that IT engineers are forever students, and companies will lose in the long term if it does not allow engineers to learn new things. So if everybody wants to win in this situation, as mentioned a lot today, we have to talk. Even the discussions cannot be very, satisfying, but the tough discussions makes a progress. Thank you very much for attending this. Thank you for joining. Have a nice evening, and thank you for taking the time. And be the quarantine lift up, and we'll be over and we get out in our outside of our houses. So thank you very much, and goodbye.